Happiness through curiosity on the Ranveer Show. What I definitely want to ask you is if you're familiar with Dhruv Rathee's videos.
Yeah.
You are?
Yes.
Now let's place Dhruv Rathee at one. I would actually place him at one end of the spectrum.
Right.
Because I think he has strong views and I respect him as a content creator, but I do place him at one end of the spectrum.
Yes.
And then at the other end, I'd probably place, I don't know, any of the Indian news channels.
Exactly.
Fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I can't think of a news channel. NDTV used to be somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, maybe on, for the sake of conversation, let's call it left and right.
Right.
Dhruv Rathee extreme left?
Yeah.
Please correct me if you...
Well, I don't know if, like this right and left, I'm a bit, but you can say that, like people like Dhruv Rathee and all that, you can argue, or, like even people like Ravish Kumar, like who are very popular phenomenon, they're at one end of the spectrum in terms of the fact. Left, right, I'm not sure, who I would call left and right, because I think it's all I'm grown up to thinking left and right in economic terms.
Okay.
That for me, left in economic terms mean people who want much more government and people on right who want much less government. That's the economic. But in political terms, you're right. I think let's just put it that these people are very anti the current government. And then you have a whole bunch of these, people like the traditional news, mainstream news media, where most of them are on the very pro-government narrative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to openly say it. It's anti-BJP, pro-BJP.
Sure. It's the government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, a friend of mine, Shreya Ghodawat, has this quote that she had shared with me. She said that if you're on either of the extremes, it's actually like a horseshoe. You're closer to each other than you are distant.
Okay.
Because you have opinions that do contain a filter of your own emotions and your own political opinion as a human being.
Yes.
Which is okay, because I guess you're in media and you're entitled to express your own human side as a part of your creativity, which in this case is reporting upon the government.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that Dhruv Rathee is completely right. And I don't believe that the traditional news media in our country is completely right.
Correct.
And the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because I don't understand economics as much as you do, the direct question to you is, can the truth of the performance of the current government be determined completely by the numbers? Is that a yes?
Well, I'd say that apart from numbers, it's also what you see, right? In terms of the fact that what numbers. Now, some people argue the numbers are doctored and this and the other. But I think it's about what you experience, what you travel.
Yes.
In terms of what you see in India. Has India changed in 5-10 years? Of course it's changed.
Let's break down this thought
a
little more. It's about what you see. It's about the numbers which may or may not be manipulated.
Yeah.
A third factor I'd put in is it's also about what general chatter you hear when you speak to people from different parts of society.
Yeah.
Anything else that you'd like to factor in?
No, I think that it's that. And as I said, that once again, there is the objective numbers. For example, what are some of the objective numbers, right?
Sure.
There's numbers the government releases, which you can sort of think, like have issues with. But then again, I go back to my role as an investor. I meet companies. These companies are reporting real, like, revenue numbers. Like this company, what was the growth rate? What were, in terms of, it's a consumer company. It's directly interfacing with the consumer, or it's got to do with some company that's building infrastructure in the country. So you get to see the real numbers. And then you have to see those numbers and see in terms of how well is India doing also from that perspective. And so therefore, I think that is another lens that I think we should add to these various factors.
I want you to expand on this exact narrative that we're speaking about right now. The only tiny question I'll throw at you before you begin the expansion is that we had a political commentator who was anti-BJP on the show.
Yeah.
He said that whatever growth you see in India would have happened even if the Congress was there, because the growth is an outcome of the population and its own growth. And then I've posed this question to different people. The people who are anti-BJP agree with him.
Yeah.
The people who are pro-BJP say that no, it depends on who is in a position of power.
Yeah.
Those people and their policies will dictate the growth of a country. When it comes to this question, I agree with the pro-BJP people. In terms of the people who are sitting in the Lok Sabha, the current leaders of the country do decide where the country goes.
Yeah.
So can you explain this answer first? Like, could you answer this question?
Yeah, sure. So I think there is no debate for me in my head, and I wrote about this even when I published my first book, Breakout Nations, that the previous government, especially in the second term, what was called the UPA, their economic track record was dismal. Was, like in terms of that, what they did, in terms of, if you look at the amount of spending that went out of control, if you look at the inflation that happened, I think, and also the fact that the vulnerability of our external position, the rupee and everything, that the second term in particular was a very bad track record. In fact, in many ways, the reason for the current government and the rise of Modi was because the track record of that government, particularly in the second term, was so bad. So I think that like this idea that no matter who's in power, something will happen, I think is too simplistic a view. I've seen many countries also do very well for a time, and then some wrong leader comes and then they can destroy the country. So the effective leadership does matter. But as I said, all these debates have to be nuanced because even the previous government, the Congress government, there were some very good spells also when it did, for example, the 1990s economic reforms were launched by the Congress government after all, in terms of what it did. Now, of course, it happened under pressure. We had no choice because we were out of money. So we were forced to do some steps, but the reforms were there. So therefore, I think that the narrative when, like the fact that the last 60 years were all terrible era, and then the last 10 years have been all the other way. I think there are some nuances to that too, that yes, there's no doubt that the second term of the previous government was terrible. And that's what laid the ground for the BJP and Mr. Modi's rise. And in terms of what they have done over the last 10 years, there have been a couple of big mistakes they too have made. I was very against demonetization. I think that was a mistake. I also felt the fact that in the initially, the very hard lockdown, everyone's got to remain home, we can't do anything, etc., was also a bit draconian. But generally, especially in the second term of this government, I'd say the economic policy has broadly been sensible, and that has helped. That has helped, and that shows up in terms of the stock market's performance as well. And, that's there. So I think that it's broadly been okay. The economic performance in the second term in particular of this government, I think, has been much better than the economic performance of, let's say, the UPA in its second term. So that distinction has to be made. But yet, I don't agree with this narrative that the last 60, because even if you look at India's, like one of my favorite charts I do about India is this one of the favorite things about India, that when India got its independence back in 1947, our ranking, if you look at it in the world, right, was like in terms of, we were a very poor country in terms of what we inherited and our ranking, but many of the countries were poor. The big thing was that for the next, after that, right up until the 1980s, India's ranking remained low or kept slipping, whereas so many other countries overtook us and did so well. Even including, that China and India, their per capita income level, which is that, how much each person earns every day in these countries was equal till the 1980s. And then after that today, China today is 5 times richer than India is today. So it's like it was equal to the 1980s. Today, China is 5 times richer than we are. So in terms of the fact is that, yes, India's economic performance right up until the 1980s was like very poor, I would say. Then you had the economic reforms in the early 1990s, which helped to, lift India up. But China took off even in a greater way. But there's no doubt that a lot was done in those few years, in the early 1990s as well, of economic reforms and what the government back then did. So again, as I said, these debates have to be nuanced, in terms of that. And I'm trying to do that here because the easy solution is to say good and bad.
Hey, if you enjoyed this clip from the Ranveer Show, we've uploaded a ton of other clips related to a ton of other topics. So explore the channel because there's something for everyone.